Hi, everyone. John Michael Coppola here, and welcome to the Chicago Theater Makers Podcast, where we chat with the actors, directors, choreographers, designers, producers, music directors, lyricists, playwrights, and all the artists who make the Chicago area theaters come alive. We're so excited to have you here with us today. But before we get started, we just want to remind you to please like, subscribe to, and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues who you think would appreciate the conversations we're having. We'd be so grateful for your support in this way so we can continue to bring these stories for years to come. Thanks again for being here, and now, curtain up on today's episode. Today's guests are from Chicago's 50-year-old South Side theater-making institution, Free Street Theater. Katrina Dion is a Chicago-based director and producer known for her radical youth work at Free Street Theater, where she acts as producing artistic director. In her 10 years at Free Street, Katrina has directed over 11 original plays, mentored over 200 youth, and produced over 40 shows. Recently, Katrina directed The Wizards by Ricardo Gamboa, presented by Concrete Content, for which she was named Best Stage Director in the Chicago Reader Best of 2022 Awards. In addition, Dion acts as an adjunct professor at the theater school at DePaul University, her alma mater. In 2019, Dion was listed as one of the top 50 people performing for Chicago theater. Her work has been featured in magazines such as Teen Vogue, and she has facilitated workshops across the country at places such as the National Civil Rights Museum, the Obama Foundation, ProPublic Illinois, and more. Tanuja Devi Jagernauth is an Indo-Caribbean PIC abolitionist, writer, theater maker, and yoga educator who believes in the necessity of creation during times of deconstruction. She is an in-house artist in residence with Free Street Theater, a member of the Playground Chicago Writer Pool, and the co-facilitator of Understory, a bi-weekly virtual space for activists and organizers to gather and contemplate that which they hold sacred. She is also the writer and director of Free Street's current production of Rupture Repair, now playing until March 7th. For tickets, please visit freestreet.org or simply click the link in our show notes. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Katrina Dion and Tanuja Devi Jagernauth. Now let's go to the top of the show. Hi, Tanuja. Hi, Katrina. How are you both doing today?
Doing really well. How are you, John?
Doing good.
I'm well. Thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast. I really appreciate it. So listen, as is our custom here, we always like to start our podcast the same way, and that is to ask our guests a little bit about their background, a little bit about their training, and then we will circle back and ask you to finish up with your first theater experience. So Tanuja, since you're in my eye line, we're going to start with you.
All right. Thanks, John. And thanks for having us. So I was born in Guyana. It is a country on the northern coast of South America. And when I was one, my parents and we were sponsored by my uncles to move to Arizona, of all places. So that's where I was raised.
Okay.
And in 2001, right after college, I came to Chicago to be a volunteer in service to America, the VISTA program, and my placement was with the Chicago Department of Public Health. I was only supposed to be here for 1 year, but very shortly after I got here, September 11th happened, and it's one of those days I will never forget. I remember exactly where I was. I was at a health fair, actually, passing out information about getting the pneumonia shot and doing the cha-cha slide with older folks, and all of a sudden I see people on their phones and they're like losing their minds and they're like, everybody go home. Anyways, so immediately after that, I got involved with the anti-war movement and the anti-sexual violence against women movement, and I stayed. Fell in love with Chicago. So many things about Chicago. I just deeply love. I met my partner, who we've been together since 2001, and I took the path of acupuncture. So I did acupuncture for over a decade. And then in 2016, after losing dear friends to cancer, it really hit me that life is very short. And if there is something that you want to do, you really better get busy and do it, right? So
Hmm.
for me, that thing was theater. I'd always wanted to be involved in theater, and um, yeah, I just ran right into an unpaid internship at Chicago Dramatists, where they taught me how to write plays. And I also got a taste of the theater industry without having to go back to grad school. So
Hmm.
it was a really beautiful opportunity to do what I called at the time a DIY MFA.
Huh?
Um, yeah. So, and then, yeah, when I was working on the Chicago Rape Crisis Hotline, that's actually where I met Goya Baz, who was one of my trainers and my shift supervisor. And so coming to theater and running back into Goya and, um, having the opportunity to get involved with Free Street felt like a beautiful full circle moment. And,
Yeah.
um, here we are.
So, what was your first theater experience that made you realize you wanted to be a part of the theater making experience?
Yeah, I grew up in Peoria, Arizona, right outside of Phoenix, and I don't know even who took me to this show, but and I have a very hazy memory of it, but I was a very small child watching. I think it was a production of Peter Pan, and it blew my mind. And just to see like young people on stage doing
Hmm.
magical things, I was like,
Yeah.
I want to do that. I want in on that. Um, and yeah, I do remember telling my mom at the time, like, I want to be an actor. I want to do that stuff at that little playhouse. And, yeah, bless my parents. They were like, okay, well, not many people really make a sustainable living in acting and theater. So as a kid, I was like, okay, fine, I'll be a cartoonist. Um, so, but all that to say, I didn't really take the path of theater following that, but that love and that fascination with the magic of theater stayed with me, obviously, my whole life.
Yeah, I think that if I recall correctly, a lot of the guests I've had on here when we asked that question, many of their first theater experiences always involved a show that had kids in it, like Annie or Sound of Music or Peter Pan. So it stands to reason that it would make an impression on a young child to see, oh wow, kids can do this. I want to do this, and then it turns into adults who still want to do this, which is amazing. Katrina, let's hear from you. Let's hear about your background, your training.
Yeah, I really resonate with that experience as well of seeing, other kids in theater or in a performance. I just identify sort of as a Midwest girl. I've lived in Chicago for 16 years, but I was born in Michigan, lived in Indiana, and then spent a lot of my growing up in Iowa City, Iowa. I did like the Big Ten circuit, sort of for anyone wondering how those things connect together. Um, and I remember similarly, to me, when I was, 6, someone on stage at a community theater versus on Broadway, that was the same level of actor caliber to me. I was like, wow, which I still think is true, but I think at the time I was like, I am seeing like Broadway at my community theater. And I remember seeing people from my class, like my literal second grade class on stage for, I think it was like a Charlie Brown Halloween presentation. And I was like, it fueled within myself of like, wait, my literal peers are on stage. I did not realize that this was something that was achievable. I thought that like you had to be from this elite, sector of actors to do it. And so I caught the bug very young and continued that journey largely as an actor growing up, I think, as most young people do. But at the same time, my mom was teaching me how to sew growing up as well. So I found
Oh,
myself also invested in costumes. I was also a dancer. I was like in show choir. And so there were all these different parts of creativity that were kind of speaking to me. And I had the opportunity at my high school to do a student produced directed show as a senior. So I got to direct while I was in high school and at the time was applying. And I just felt very called to Chicago. There was just something about being here that the moment I was in this city, I just was so taken by it and have continued to fall in love through that time. But my journey to Free Street, where I'm now the producing artistic director, is simultaneously building in my love of theater and the city as a whole. And then while being in college, similar to Tanuja, I'm meeting Koya Paz is one of my professors who lands me an internship, being assistant to Ricardo Gamboa with our youth ensemble for the summer. All the while, this is when Occupy Chicago is happening, and I'm attending the NATO G8 summit protests. And I think really looking at this overlap of both like the performance aesthetics of protests and realizing like the power of both of these things is that they bring people together to
Mhm.
enact change and inspire forward momentum. And so then applying a lot of what I was taking of being radicalized in college into the theater, which I think I was already really interested at the time. I would have called it, I think, political theater, and then kind
Mm.
of developed the practice into more theater for social justice through that time where I've remained and, continued to work both at Free Street and beyond and practicing. And it's been a real, like, yeah, a love story of continuing to fall in love with Chicago's in its totality more and more every year.
Yeah, that's also a common theme here on the podcast. People who sort of knew about the Chicago theater scene and came here to discover it and fell in love and never left. Certainly, that's part of my story as well. And so it stands to reason that it's brought us so many gifted theater makers here in town who not only loved the city, but the city loves them back and loves their participation being here. I'm curious for each of you if you have any lessons that you bring from your life experience into your theater making, or vice versa, if there's any lessons you learned from theater making that you bring into your life experience. And Katrina, we'll continue with you.
Yeah, I think that theater is, yeah, this interesting practice of we have to get together in new configurations constantly. Like we are always meeting new people and
Mhm.
always having to build trust like very quickly. And so I think I've learned a lot about like caring for community and also how to hold, yeah, the trust building process and what that can look like. Um, and how that applies to life, and what it means to maintain a community, I think is something that theater has given me that I apply to a lot of my friendships. I think something through Free Street that's sort of come up is a very humor, like a human-centered approach to making theater.
Mm.
An example of this is that our how we go about budgeting at Free Street is we start with like how much do our people cost, our artists, our staff, and making sure that we can pay them. And then we say, okay, how much do we have left? Like, and we apply that towards the things and really
Amazing.
try to look at it with less of scarcity and more of like, what do we already have, and what we need to maintain is the people. And so I feel like that's same in that community lesson, of like, we have to take care of each other first before we can worry about the stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and that's something, I mean, through the pandemic, like so many theater companies had to furlough their artists. And I think Free Street, um, we were like, the last thing we're going to do is fire people. We would sooner not do a play than we would not pay these artists in this way. So we were able to really maintain all of our artistic contracts and staff contracts through that time. And I think that lesson of like being a theater company in that particular era and what it meant to care for each other beyond just the play itself is something that really, yeah, sticks with me. That it's not just about the art, it's about the relationships.
I love that sort of inverted triangle top-down theory of pay the artist first and then see where all the rest of the chips lie. I have a good friend, David Goldsmith, who has his own podcast in New York. Now it's called Does It Sing, but originally it was a joint podcast with his friend Paul Gordon. And Paul is also a composer lyricist, as is David. And Paul, on one of the early podcasts, Paul said, you know, it's called a musical. So if I'm going to do a musical, I want to know that the music is going to be the focus of the show. It's not called aesthetical. It's not called the projectionical, because a lot of musicals now they focus on the sets and the costumes and the projections and not so much the music, which is sort of the core. So, so sort of keeping things in focus. And of course,
Hmm.
on top of even the musical, it's the artists first, right? Without the artists,
Hmm.
we don't have any theater at all. So I love that you guys take that approach. And it's something that I think more theater companies might want to take a closer look at and maybe start adopting as their own focus. How about you,
Yeah.
Tanuja? What lessons have you learned in your life and that you apply to theater making or vice versa?
Yeah, I really want to second everything that Katrina said about taking a care and human-centered approach to making theater. And one thing that I've heard Goya say in the past is, a budget is a values-based document. It's a
Mm.
moral document, right? And so
Mhm.
it really is a statement of what you literally value. And so just underlining what Katrina just said about starting with your people first, paying them, and then working your way to the materials. And yeah, I want to also underline this idea of like, you know, the shows come and go, but what you have after the show are the relationships, and
Mhm.
people will remember how they were treated. They will remember how they felt in the rehearsal room and in the
Yep.
process. And, I think I want to really keep that in mind, not just as a theater maker, but as a human.
Mhm.
Um, I think theater and this show in particular has taught me, trust your collaborators, trust the process. We come together and we make magic, and you have to leave some space and some room for that. And that means, if you're in the director role, like sometimes you have to step back, you have to fall back and, allow things to unfold. Um, and then, I personally um I study the writings of Tema Okun, who she writes about white supremacy, culture characteristics, and also the antidotes. So, what are these kind of traps that we can all fall into that mirror and replicate the dominant culture and ultimately create harm in our relationships? And so, for me, I really appreciate having a practice of, you know, lifting up those antidotes to white supremacy culture. So in place of perfectionism, focusing on gratitude and as much kindness as possible. In place of hyper individualism, I'm the only one who can do XYZ. How am I sharing power and collaborating with others? And there are more. I can send you the link to their article if you're interested. But um,
Please.
really, like um, having whatever code works for you, keeping your values in that code at the core while you're making theater or doing whatever you do. Because as we know, there's so many moving parts. Things can
Mhm.
get urgent, hectic, chaotic. You might encounter surprises, right? And so, how do we show up in those moments and how do we treat folks in those moments? It really matters, especially when, we do keep hearing about theater companies that are led by abusive leaders,
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
yeah. And a lesson I've learned that I just want to nail right now
Please,
is,
please.
we there is a difference between discomfort and conflict and abuse. And
Yes.
we must not encourage each other to accept abuse in theater or in any context.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, theater is a beautiful way to lift up a mirror to society. It's a beautiful way to lift up a mirror to ourselves. And so, let's take that opportunity, really lean into it and, you know, perhaps invite theater to help us become better human beings.
Bravo. All well said, and I couldn't agree more. Particularly the part about um, you know, choosing how you conduct yourself and how you treat others. People may not remember what you say, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. I try and lead with that as often as I can. I mean, we all fall short sometimes, and we have to, pick ourselves back up even.
Yep.
But it's, everything you said is exactly you said right now, right on the head. So thank you for sharing all that. I'm curious, with that in mind, are there any influential people you've had in your life, either to theater making or to your life's work of, your social justice work? Anything like that? Tanuja, did you want to share?
Sure, I can start with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned that I started my tenure in Chicago on the Chicago Rape Crisis Hotline. So that's where I met Rachel Kydor, Vicky Sides, Goya Paz, Lauren Pretnard, Jen Vallis, and those folks, they were my coworkers and also trainers, and they introduced me to Black feminism and connected me to the folks that I would end up working with for a long time, such as Shira Hassan, Miriam Kaba, and prison industrial complex abolitionists and folks who practice transformative justice. And, a lot of those ideas are also embedded in rupture repair as a result. In the theater realm, I want to lift up Dana Lynn Formby, the person I've studied playwriting with most consistently. And she's the person that I think of when I sit down to begin writing anything. I do want to lift up Goya Paz again as just somebody who gave me opportunities to learn by doing. Katrina Dion now is like my directing guide and mentor, and I'll always be thinking about, okay, what did Katrina tell me? But I was like, what? And I really have to thank so many people who, I don't have a formal training in theater. So anybody who's given me the time of day, who was like, hey, come and work on this project, with us, come learn by doing. And so I want to lift up Tara Branham, Olivia Lilly, Kristen Idajak, and in Rupture Repair, I found some guidance from Tectonic Theater, their Moment Workbook, as well as on HowlRound, I found the National Institute for Directing and Ensemble Creation.
Oh, wow.
They're incredible, and I actually ended up getting COVID during our early rehearsals, and I spent like 4 days in bed just watching the HowlRound videos about directing and ensemble creation, and I took away so many beautiful lessons from those videos. So I want to thank them. They're part of my lineage now.
That's quite the list. That's wonderful. And I have to sort of share with you as well. I learned to do theater by doing myself. I grew up in a very healthy community theater area. People who were doing community theater were former professionals that were now imparting all of their knowledge by directing and choreographing these shows that I was able to be a part of growing up. But I didn't have a formal training in theater in university setting. So I love to hear the stories, many of which I've had on this podcast, with people who have had similar journeys, because I've shared stages with people who have gone to Yale School of Drama, and we're standing on the same stage doing the same job. And it just always gives me a sense of relief that I didn't do it wrong. Like there's no one straight path to success. And so I'm so glad that so many people have lifted you up and brought you to the success that you're seeing now. So that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. How about you, Katrina? What influential people have you got in your life?
Yes, I love this notion, right, of like the pathways we can open up for each other, right, that are non-traditional and like welcome more people into the artistic practice. And in that, I feel really grateful for the people who saw something in me as I was still shaping myself and helped sort of guide me through those early years. I think all the way back to being in Iowa City, we had this like young Shakespeare company at the professional theater in town, Riverside, where my director, Mary Sullivan, and then the other artists that were there were a big part of that like early phase. When I got into college, I think again, Koya Paz and Ricardo Gamboa were so influential in helping me to concretize these ideas of bringing social justice into theater and making ensemble work. At the same time, Bonnie Metzger was an early mentor of mine and gave me my first professional jobs that introduced me to artists that I still work with to this day. Um, an early and ongoing collaborator I love that lives in New York. Their name is Morgan McNaught. Um, our collaborations taught me so much about about care and tenderness and process that I really value. And a lot, I feel like I'm someone where I think also at that same time, again, to like go back to that feeling of Occupy and that era in Chicago, like what also really influenced my art was not only the conversations I was having in theater school class, but the things I was doing outside of that. And a lot of my friends were not
Mm.
theater people. And I think that that has also been a blessing of like expansive community, of how that allows us to not be so insular to our individual experience and really kind of look at like the complexities of everything. And I think that really tied into my early making and really also shaped that at the same time. I'm a mover and I have dance and choreographer friends that have both in the way they make space and build worlds. Erin Kilmurray, Casey Alfonso, Lisa Gregory, Kara Brody, that are all people I've worked with that their practice really inspires me. Um, and then I think just as like these are people that I don't know, but like their work, like Young Jean Lee's work, seeing Untitled Feminist Show when I was in college, seeing work by Elevator Repair Service, the work that I've gotten to collaborate with Albany Park Theater Project or Third Rail projects, and there's all of these like dimensions. I think the family trees of theater makers, are so complex and like
Yeah.
how we kind of borrow and learn from each other. And so
Yeah.
I could probably keep branching out a little bit. But I think that there's a lot of really brilliant folks that I've been able to be in space with in a lot of different ways that have, um, I think it like also leans into I still run our youth ensemble here, my commitment to the youth here in Chicago, that I feel so grateful to have had people help me shape myself and see that thing and allow me to make mistakes. And I always really, it feels important for me to create that space for others also in practice.
Wonderful. And the family tree just keeps growing and the branches just keep reaching out further and further. I
Yeah.
love that analogy. That's amazing. I'd like to know a little bit more about Free Street actually. Until you guys reached out to be on the podcast, honestly, there's so many theater companies here in Chicago that I just didn't know Free Street. So I'd love to hear more about it for you to impart that knowledge to our listeners as well. Give us a little bit of an idea of the work that they do on the South Side. And then I'd like to hear a little more about the Artist in Residence program that Tanuja is a part of.
Yeah, so many layers to Free Street, and in some ways we're in our own sort of corner of the theater community because one, a lot of times we've said we're theater for people who hate theater, because we are making plays that are really centering like Chicago issues and are trying to create this space of coalition building. A lot of times we live a little bit more on the fringes. And I think a lot of times people come to our shows and come in being like, I don't like theater, and end up being like, oh, I didn't know theater could look like that or be like that.
Yeah.
Um, and so to take us back on this long journey of how we even get to an artist residence process, Free Street was actually founded in 1969, in the wake of back-to-back riots here in Chicago in 1968. And our founder, Patrick Henry, along with a collaborator named Perry Bear, um, were kind of tasked with like, how do we heal a divided city? And the group that funded the beginnings of Free Street Theater is actually now known as the Illinois Arts Council, but they gave a grant to Patrick Henry to develop the Free Street Theater, which
Oh,
was one of the first racially integrated theater companies here in the city. And they performed these musicals that were really about togetherness and unity, that toured on the back of a semi truck that would open up and just pop up in communities across the South and West Side,
wow.
because a thing that Patrick was trying to do with the company that remains today is to create theater that's more geographically accessible across Chicago. Since the
Hmm.
majority of theater companies are on the northeast side of the city, bringing theater to people on the south and west side, because we know as the city is designed, it keeps people apart. Chicago continues to be one of the most segregated cities in the country. And so for theater to be accessible, to bring it to them, to make it free, and then to have it to be about the stories of that community. And so we see that through the evolution sort of build, where then that touring around turned into sort of this long form ensemble created work, where the most famous version of this is a production from the late 70s or early 80s called Project Exclamation Point, which was developed by, with, and about the residents of Cabrini Green, the housing project that was in Chicago, and that actually toured internationally. And I've been able to speak to some of the people that were a part of that production. And when Patrick Henry passed away, the company, after a few shifts, transitioned to doing youth-centered work for about 2 decades. So only this original content created by youth. Again, it was focused on responding sort of a need for youth to have creative space ahead of us having formal programs like After School Matters. But when the board let go of the artistic director in 2012, um, enter Koya Paz and Carolyn O'Boyle, who were originally brought in to close out the company. They had a grant to finish a youth show, and Carolyn and Koya were like, this is a legacy theater with this huge history.
Yeah.
And what a loss that would be to just close the door on it. So they pitched to the board sort of a going back to mission, a bringing back of this multi-generational ensemble developed Chicago focused stories while maintaining the youth program. And that has only grown over the last now 14 years, where we also have a space on the South Side. So again, really doubling down on that commitment to theater being accessible. We're one of a handful of theaters on the South Side of Chicago and back of the yards, where we not only provide free theater and free programming, but we also offer the space for free for anyone in the community that needs space. We still have a youth program. And then we have our artist in residence program. So I can kind of jump in a little bit into that. It's a long history, so there's a lot there. But one thing I'll finally say about that is I think there's always this question of like, how does a theater company survive this long? And the mission of Free Street has always been to ask, like, what does Chicago need right now from a theater company invested in social justice movements? And I think that being committed to that means also changing when the times ask you to change. And
Mhm.
so I think Free Street is a history of responsiveness and flexibility and
Yeah.
community centered approach, which has allowed it to have the longevity that it's had for being a small non-equity theater.
That's a great transition for my next question, which is for Tanuja. Tanuja, I'd like to know more about Rupture Repair. Obviously, you wrote it, you're directing it, and my first question is why this play now?
Absolutely. Love this question. Um, you know, Katrina, you mentioned coalition building, and, we're in a time right now where we really need our coalition work, our group work more than ever.
Hmm.
And at the same time, in my decades of experience, working with folks across parts of social justice movement, I've seen again and again and again that our coalition work often gets interrupted or cut short by conflict that we're not able to either transform or navigate. And so the thing just ends. And so why rupture repair? It is a inquiry into what conflict transformation can look like.
Hmm.
And it's really an invitation to reflect on your own experiences, feel right, and to think about your own kind of relationship to conflict and conflict transformation. And so concretely, what are you going to see if you come to this show? I promise it's not scary. There are no curse words in it except for one, which is damn.
Hmm.
And so it's set in a imaginary world, and you're going to follow three different world builders who are asking the question, what um, can we learn from the fragments of ruptured relationships and unprocessed emotion that literally surround us. And so they decide to take some time to look at a few of these fragments that are surrounded by them, and we see them kind of process what we can do with the lessons from ruptured relationships.
It sounds like it's not linear play. Is there a timeline, like beginning, middle, end, or it's obviously a made up world, as you said? So I'm just curious what what people can expect when they come to see it in sort of that context for people who don't like theater.
Mhm. Yeah, you will be there for 45 minutes, 45 to 50 minutes. There is no intermission. And I think the central question gets posed at the very beginning,
Ah,
and then we go on a journey, and we're going to see three distinct parts that get capped off at the end by an answer to the question at the
ah,
very beginning. So we're going to see an individual grapple with what it looks like to be accountable when they've done harm to a friend, when they've hurt one of their friends. We are
mm,
going to see two friends in a friendship um, work through what I'm calling a moment of generative conflict, where they have a rupture and decide to do what they need to do to come back together and face each other. And then you see a group of neighbors, a group of three neighbors who are trying to do what so many people out here are trying to do with mutual aid and coalition work. And they face some of the common stuff that comes up in group work, and they have to make a decision about how they're going to navigate. So like it's a yeah, it's three different little scenarios that you see wrapped up in a question sandwich.
that's a great summary. Thank you for wrapping that up for us. I would like to know from each of you, and we'll continue with Tanuja first. Are there any theater experiences either here in Chicago or elsewhere that have stayed with you all these years?
Yes. I feel like, and everyone's different, and I certainly love the many shows I've been able to see at regional theaters in Chicago. We're so blessed to have so much storefront theater and yeah, beautiful productions you can catch at like the Goodman and Steppenwolf. But I will say, like, the theatrical experience that I think keeps me coming back to theater is actually Free Strait's 50 in 50 day long celebration of their 50th anniversary, in which we performed a short play in every single ward in Chicago. And
Wow.
so I got to be a production manager for that, and got to see plays happening on basketball courts, in alleys, in front of libraries, and minimal set,
Yeah.
minimal rehearsal, even just site specific, if you will, celebrations of theater, short plays written by folks from the community. And it was such a joy, and such a challenging feat of logistics. But
So I'm fascinated by this now. Was it like flash mob style, or did you guys like announce that this is happening? Like, how did you coordinate all this and get the word out about it?
yeah, there was a schedule of where we would be throughout the day, and we
Okay.
publicized that on social media. And then when the short plays were actually happening, we filmed them live and put them on Facebook so folks could follow along um, throughout the day.
Incredible. And the plays were not, they didn't connect, right? They're all in individual plays and that's incredible. You guys only do that once for the 50th anniversary, so it's not gonna be like because it's 50 wards. So 51, there's no 51 wards, so you're not gonna be recreating that dynamic ever again, I assume.
I'll kick that to Katrina. I don't know.
I know. Our 60th is around the corner, so we're like, time to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
thinking about what that looks like. Yeah. No, I mean, that was such a gorgeous day of collaboration. We ended the day with all of the artists. I mean, over 100 artists working on this came together in the backyard of Carolyn O'Boyle. And we had this like beautiful celebration that just felt like such a celebration of Chicago, because the artists that we assigned sort of the awards based on where the artists had their kind of like deepest connections to. So that where
Okay.
people were performing kind of like in and around their community, or relationally to where they felt was important to them. So I'm sure we'll find some other way to be bold and, continue to kind of make statements on, I think, like the challenge of like, hey, like we can make theater accessible. If we can perform in
Uh-huh.
50 wards in one day with 100 people, like we can do anything,
Yeah.
as a community. And so I think that's sort of we'll keep figuring out how to do that in new ways as well. Yeah.
So great. I love learning about that. And I can't wait to see what you guys do next. And before we finish up, we need to, of course, make people aware Rupture Repair that just opened. Where can they get tickets for that? How long is it running? All that good stuff. So I'll either of you want to fill us in on that? That's great. Katrina, I don't want to put you on the spot. You wanted to take care of that?
Sure. Yeah. So
Great.
if you want to grab tickets to Rupture and Repair, if you head to freestreet.org on our events page, we have a calendar where you can then find the link to the Eventbrite to grab tickets. The
Great.
show is Fridays at 7 and Saturdays at 2 p.m. through March 7th. We're going to have some days also where we have talkbacks, some days with free childcare as well.
Amazing.
Where people, yes, we love to make it the theme as accessible as possible, which often means childcare, in addition to a free ticket. So tickets online are available at different price rates, but we also reserve a few walk-up tickets that are pay what you can
Great.
for every performance. So if a show is sold out, still come. We really try. We've had shows sometimes where we're like, the audience capacity is 60, and then 30 people show up and we say, okay, we will get these extra chairs in. So we really try and really get as many people into the show as we possibly can.
Fantastic. Well, we will also have a link to the tickets in our show notes. So please go there for a quick navigation. You can click on it. It'll take you right to the events page on Eventbrite for tickets for Rupture Repair. Katrina, Tanuja, thank you guys so much for joining me on the podcast. It was an honor to chat with you both and learn more about Free Street. I hope I get down there to see a production at some point. I am doing my own show right now, so our schedules are conflicting, but I will definitely keep my eye out for whatever you guys are doing next, which is, do you have something lined up after Rupture Repair?
Yeah, our youth ensemble, which is made of 14 to 19-year-olds, but they are making some brilliant work, if I do say so myself, as being their
Yes.
director for 10 years. Don't sleep on the youth ensembles in the city of Chicago either. They have a show called Spark, which is opening up on May 1st, and we'll have a run throughout May. That play is them talking about kind of the beginning of their journey as activists and what's going to keep them in the movement. But they're also interviewing activists from many generations that are any age from 25 to 80, talking about what they were like when they were teenagers and they were finding their spark. So it's all about these beginning journeys through the different decades. We also, sorry, can I say one
Yes,
other
please,
thing?
please.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much. We have an awesome event coming up. Um, can I cuss on this show? Is that
absolutely.
allowed?
Yeah.
Okay, we have a series called Fuck Around and Find Out, which is all about all of our plays are about these issues, and we really wanted to create a series where we connected our audience more to some of the scholars or writers or activists that we were talking to. So we have an event coming up on April 2nd, which is with some really esteemed Chicago authors talking about kind of writing and thinking about the future of Chicago. So if you can't come to a play, but you want to kind of be in the spirit of Free Street, that'll be coming up on April 2nd at Haymarket. And again, if you head to freestreet.org, you can find more information about how to get tickets to that.
Amazing. I'm so glad you included that. Again, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you being here. And I'm really glad that we had a chance to chat about Free Street and looking forward to what you guys have coming up in the very near and long-term future.
Yes.
Thanks,
Thank you
John.
so much
Take
for
care.
having us.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining us at the Chicago Theater Makers Podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The Chicago Theater Makers Podcast is a production of Spirit Art LLC, and our podcast theme music is by Paul Langford. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please drop us a note at our website, shytheatermakerspodcast.com. That's CHITHEATER, makers with an S, podcast.com. We hope you enjoyed spending time with us as much as we enjoyed spending it with you, and we'll see you on the board soon.